This is our last episode with Dr. Bill Smith. I hope you've enjoyed the conversations as much as I have. In our next and final conversation, we'll talk about what we've missed so far in his new book on the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. We'll talk about spirit babies and Joseph Smith's Protology. Check out our conversation. I also want to remind you all to please purchase this book. It's been a fantastic book so far, and I hope you, just learning what you know about it, that you'll go out and buy that book. Also remember, we've got our latest book with Dr. Newell Bringhurst on sale. We'll have Dr. Smith's here available very shortly. So please subscribe if you'd like to be the first to receive a copy of this transcript. Now back to our conversation. Well, let me just open this up for you. What are some things from your book that we've not talked about that we should have talked about?
I think this high priesthood cycle kind of thing is really an important theme in the book that runs through it. I think that the way sealing is thought about after Joseph Smith dies, when it gets this attached sort of pessimism to it through your faithfulness kinds of things, that happens fairly early on.
Oh,
and I think it's a practical issue. People who hadn't been through the fire with Joseph Smith, like the early members of the church that stayed with it, I think people saw them as a kind of a second-class citizen in a way, and needed to be vetted, needed to be learned to be trusted. And so this clause, through your faithfulness, I think was a way of sort of categorizing people as, wait and see.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because I wanted to bring this up a little bit sooner, but when I was on my mission, I served in South Carolina and Georgia, very Bible belt, learned my Bible quite well, had to. And, we would run across, a born-again Christian or somebody, and they would say, all you got to do is say this prayer and you'll be saved. Doesn't matter what you do. And Mormons, you get into the whole grace and works things. And so, as you mentioned here, this idea of sealing a husband and wife together, whether it was polygamously or monogamously, sounds to me, as I listen to that, sounds very similar to this Protestant idea of being saved. And as modern Mormons, we would reject that. No, faith without works is dead. And so it's interesting to hear you say how we've kind of evolved, whereas the original sealing was Joseph, be sealed to me, you'll get right into heaven. It sounds like a get out of jail free card. Just marry me.
It sounds that way. It would work out that way, but yeah.
And so that would cause me some consternation, but it sounds like it caused early church members some consternation as well, in that no, you've got to still be faithful. I mean, is that am I reading that the right way?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think even when you talk about second blessing or second anointing, that kind of lost a little bit of its luster even in that period too. So you get Heber C. Kimball talking about still being faithful, even if you received these interesting blessings in the temple or in the endowment house or council house or something, where you've received these anointings and sealings and so forth. There's still this element of, we've got a territory. We've got a territory to build here. We need people who are not going to relax. We need people who are going to carry on. And this is a kind of a theme that carries through here, is that, you can lose your blessings if you don't carry on and be faithful to promises that you
endure
made.
To the end.
Yeah, that's a big theme then, and it's an even bigger one now. So, yeah, endurance to the end is very scriptural kind of thing. It appears all over in our modern and the Bible. It's sort of this theme of you have to keep on to the end. And I guess this perseverance of sealings is maybe had them worried a little bit that people would take that and say, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to. Going to church is the wrong thing to say, because going to church was sort of a fairly rare activity anyway. But about 15% activity in Utah in those early days. But
really?
Yeah, especially after the Johnston's army came through and they had to pick up and move south, and then finally when they came back, activity went way down then for some reason. And they didn't have very good places to meet and that sort of thing. But yeah, this is this sort of pessimism. Pessimism, I think, was important to their circumstance. There's another issue we didn't talk about, and that's the protological impact. That is, when I say protological, I mean the theology of the beginnings. Where did everything start, kind of thing. The Revelation impacts that, not directly, it doesn't talk about that, but the way people interpreted it or developed the surrounding superstructure of thought around it, that's a very important issue. Because Joseph lays out a protology in Nauvoo. He's really talking about the nature of the soul, that the soul doesn't begin anywhere. It's always been around. This sort of conflicts with the idea that develops out of the Revelation that souls are spirit babies that are born in heaven through heavenly sex. This is a really important issue that surrounds the Revelation. So how do we reconcile these two theological kinds of protologies that develop really out of Joseph Smith's Nauvoo teaching and then out of the subsequent sort of teaching about the Revelation and polygamy and all this, and the cultural, you can watch the cultural impacts of what in sociology there's this notion started with Clifford Geertz, I think, is called strain. Strain is sort of a manifestation, a kind of social change that's a result of past stress. So you see this strain that happens in the interpretation of the Revelation. What does it really mean in terms of, say, seed? You mentioned seed. I talk a lot about this and what does seed mean? Seed, biblically, seed was understood, at least among the rank and file, as sort of that knew the word or read the word or saw the word in the Bible. It meant semen. Women didn't have anything to do with seed. They were receptacles. They were pots. And God could open their womb to receive the seed and be planted, or he could shut their womb and not allow the seed to be planted. But it was men who produced the seed, not women. There was no idea of sperm and egg kind of thing. And of course, male seed, if you will, was always in evidence, right? But not female. So yeah, how do you interpret that notion of seed? How does that get interpreted in the Revelation? At first, it's the way. How do you reconcile this with Joseph's theory of souls? And what about in Utah? How does this idea get interpreted? Early on, as changes start to happen, right when Joseph Smith dies, and people start thinking about this and what does all this mean, and how do we reinterpret what he said in terms of what we know about polygamy? The insiders were the ones who were worried about this. So, yeah, that's all discussed in the book too. But we didn't talk about that. But yeah, that's an really important issue, and as far as the Revelation is concerned.
So let me just finish off with one last question. I know I need to let you go, but so do you see a tie with 132 and the current family proclamation?
Yeah, I think they're very closely connected. They're almost. It's not so much that the text of 132 is like quoted in the proclamation precisely, but there's superstructure of thought that developed in Utah with the social transformation from Nauvoo to the isolation of the Intermountain West. This required a really kind of change of motivated by circumstance, but there was theological change that sort of built on this or helped it or saw strengthening this, what people needed to maintain a cohesive sort of Latter-day Saints ethos. So yeah, it develops a superstructure of thought, and part of that superstructure is mentioned in the proclamation, that spirits have gender. This has roots that go way back into early Mormonism, but the the disgust angle of this sort of thing really comes out of Section 132. So yeah, it has an impact in our theology, the way it was announced in the Proclamation of the Family. Sex in heaven, basically, is the idea there, and the Revelation speaks to that in a way, but how it speaks to that is an issue I try to go through in the book.
So, well, let me just finish up then. So, because gay marriage obviously has a big problem because it doesn't produce offspring. So,
and that's a kind of an issue that plays into this early thing of Joseph Smith. Are souls made, or are they just there? I mean, are souls recruited out of a sort of an infinite supply of souls in some well, and then kind of initiated into the program of salvation somehow, or are they birthed by sex in heaven? Well, obviously, one of those scenarios doesn't include some kind of post-mortal gay relationship in heaven, whereas the other one could accommodate something like that. But that's not the one that we've sort of kept. That's another thing I talk about in the book, is how people reconciled those two views, because eventually we started to take our history sort of more seriously. With 1890s, we started deciding, well, we want to publish Joseph Smith's history, or even the early history of the church up through Brigham Young, in really nice hard volumes, not just like serial publications that we've done in our magazines. And so, they assign somebody, that falls through. They assign somebody else, that falls through. Finally lands in B.H. Roberts' lap. And the story of that is really fascinating, but I don't talk about it in the book, so I won't talk about it here. But anyway, so he is, by 1895, he's starting to try to reconcile these two stories, Joseph Smith's Protology and the superstructure of 132 that's developed in post Joseph Smith times, really early on, but big time in Utah, and. How do we reconcile these? So he kind of says, well, look, there must be something else going on here. There must be something called, he uses the languages of Scripture, the Book of Abraham, Doctrine and Covenants. So he it's there, but intelligences. So he places intelligences as a prior to spirits. So intelligences are there, and then spirits are still conceived by heavenly sex, by those who are God and his wife or wives, and others who achieve exaltation in their families are built upon spirits that are conceived in the normal way that we think about human procreation. But they have spirits that come into them, sort of what he calls intelligences, so that they get intelligences get planted into spirits. So it's his way of reconciling what he sees in Joseph Smith. It's very evident in the preaching record, and this sort of superstructure of thought about what is it all about in terms of marriage in heaven. What does that mean? And so he tries to reconcile these two things. People don't like it at the time, and so it becomes very controversial. It's another book I'm working on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. King Follett Discourse book, yeah.
Oh, really?
So,
I mean, is gay marriage compatible with either 132 or the Family Proclamation, or would we have to jettison those in order to...
I don't know about 132. I imagine an interpretive scaffolding could be developed. In terms of Proclamation of the Family, obviously not. But that's part of the interpretive superstructure of 132, and it could, that could be revamped. But these are all really tough and probably far future questions, I'm guessing.
So do you talk about that in your book, about gay marriage with 132?
Only glancingly with reference to the proclamation.
Okay.
If I do it somewhere else, I can't remember. I did it.
All right. So the last question: could you see that? We've talked about official declaration. So official declaration 3 would be women getting priesthood. Official declaration 4 would be gays getting being theologically okay?
I don't know any idea, but it seems like the numbering ought to probably go that direction.
Yeah. We ought to just put sections on like the Community of Christ does. I think they're up to they're in the 160s, I'm pretty sure. So
yeah, we've been really reluctant. There was a lot of discussion about that in terms of should we put Brigham Young's revelation in the Doctrine and Covenants, or should be just confined to Joseph Smith's revelation? So there's heavy kinds of discussions about that. And
I think there's one for 137. Isn't that one from Brigham Young?
Joseph Smith still. Yeah.
Oh. There's one from Brigham Young in there, isn't there?
136.
136.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
But that's sort of the capstone of the end of Joseph Smith, the beginning of the new era, and nothing else. John Taylor, Wilford Rivers did have written revelations. Some of them were published in a foreign language, Doctrine and Covenants, but they never made it into the English language one.
Oh wow! I have to get one of those. All right. Well, and we did talk about the John Taylor. I referred to it as the uncanonized revelation on polygamy with Ann Wild too. So yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for sitting down here in Gospel Tangents. I'm excited to continue reading your book. It's a lot of fun, and appreciate you spending some time here in Gospel Tangents.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Bill Smith. I'd like to thank Bill for spending so much time talking with us about his book. And I'd like to encourage you all to go out and buy it. It's a fantastic book, and I think you'll see new perspectives on Section 132 that you haven't seen before. It's really great. I also want to encourage you all to become a monthly subscriber. Please help support this podcast by just spending $10 a month. I'll give you a copy of every transcript from this point forward as a monthly subscriber as soon as they are released. In our next conversation, I'd like to introduce George Potter. He's done a lot of research in the Middle East on the Exodus and on the Book of Mormon and has seen a lot of parallels. In our next and first conversation with George Potter, check out some of his research associates.
And even more recently, a lot of Saudis have joined me, non-Mormons have gone out there, and it's really kind of an interesting experience being in the desert, having a campfire at night, wondering which wadi would Lehi have gone down to, and my non-member American sitting there having his homemade wine and his cigar, and my Muslim friends arguing about which wadi they would have gone down. But to them as well, it's very obvious that the Book of Mormon is true.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you like our page on facebook.com/gospeltangents. You can subscribe at youtube.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter @gospeltangents, as well as make sure that you subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss any of our episodes. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our videos. Thanks again.